Okay, great. That's good to know. Okay, Nick, because this is going to be available for the replay, if it's okay with you, then we're going to go ahead and start.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so for those of you who are here with us today, welcome to the atypical funding presentation that we have with Nick Maturo today at the second National Asian Heritage Month Symposium. And before we start, we just wanted to acknowledge that, of course, many of us are settlers, immigrants, or descendants to those who are forcefully brought to this land or to the land where you are now. Or perhaps you're an immigrant and not indigenous to the territory where you are now. But regardless of who you are, we make sure that we pay respect and recognize the original custodians of this land, of where we are. And out of respect for the rights of the Indigenous people, it's our collective responsibility to critically interrogate the cultural histories and the colonial histories and the present day's implications of that. And so the work that we do on behalf of the festival Accès is from the perspective of honoring, protecting, and sustaining this land and its peoples who were first on this territory. So we strive to go beyond just acknowledgement of the land, and we weave in Indigenous knowledge, share principles, and invite you to move beyond an acknowledgement and into the doing. And so that's what we're here to do with this symposium. So my name is Farah Fancy. I'll be your moderator for today, and I want to introduce to you Nick Maturo, who's here from ELAN, which is the English Language Arts Network of Quebec, and he is the research coordinator there. So Nick, I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you very much, Farah. I will just share my screen quickly so you can all see my presentation. I hope that's working for everybody. Does that seem to be working, Farah? Okay, great. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining me here today. It's really great to be taking part in this year's symposium. I want to say a big thank you to Farah for inviting me to participate. I'm really honored and happy to do so. So yes, as you know, my name is Nick Maturo. I'm a research coordinator for Quebec Relations, which is a project of ELAN, or the English Language Arts Network here in Montreal. That's where I'm talking to you from today. So just a few quick words about ELAN. So we're a not-for-profit organization basically that connects, supports, and creates opportunities for Quebec's English-speaking artists and arts communities throughout the entire province of Quebec, across artistic disciplines, through cultural and geographic backgrounds, as well as linguistic and cultural communities. So through our Pay What You Can membership, we're able to offer promotion and support services to our members, as well as a whole variety of other perks and resources, interesting events and workshops. ELAN also oversees a number of other projects in addition to Quebec Relations, including a program to help place artists in schools to help facilitate creative learning experiences for students, as well as a project to present and promote live streaming performances during COVID-19. But today I'm going to be talking to you about the Quebec Relations project and how we're helping English-speaking arts and culture organizations in Quebec find and apply for provincial funding. But not just the usual arts councils. Through our research and support, we're helping organizations in our community apply for important funding from other sectors as well. So even though our work is specific to Quebec, we believe that the work we're doing can serve as a really useful model to get you thinking about the kinds of funding alternatives where you are that could potentially be a huge and overlooked resource for your communities. So this project is just one example of how an underserved community in this case, a linguistic minority, English speakers in Quebec, which in itself contains an incredibly diverse range of communities and groups, can benefit from support to help even the playing field when it comes to funding. So I'll just give you a kind of a brief outline of how I'm going to proceed before we launch into it. So first I'll give you some background on Quebec Relations, talk to you about the work we've been doing since the project began in 2018, including our research into non-traditional funding. Then I'll present some examples of that funding, how those programs can benefit organizations in the arts. And I'll conclude by talking a bit about the support we provide to make sure organizations aren't just aware of these options, but actually submit applications. So we won't waste any time. We'll get right down to business, answering the question, what is Quebec Relations? Quebec Relations is essentially a project funded by the Secretariat for Relations with English-speaking Quebecers. The Secretariat is a body of the provincial government, which was created in 2017, based on some long-standing requests from the English-speaking community, as a way to have better access to Quebec government ministries and as a means of being able to ask questions and resolve any problems. So the genesis for this particular project basically came about when the Secretariat asked ELAN whether there continue to be problems for English-speaking Quebecers in accessing arts funding. And the answer to that is yes, for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's just a matter of that information not circulating within the English-speaking community. Often it's because important documentation just isn't available in English. And sometimes there are systemic barriers, either real or perceived, that keep people from applying. So for example, many English-speaking artists in Quebec feel more comfortable applying to either Canada Council or municipal funders like the Montreal Arts Council compared to their provincial equivalents. And then once you go beyond the traditional arts funders, it's really uncharted territory, and many people really just don't even feel like it's worth applying. So with these issues in mind, Quebec Relations was created as a 3-year project running until March of 2021 with a few goals in mind. So the first of those goals is to carry out research to determine the English-speaking arts community's funding needs, as well as their attitudes towards funders in Quebec, whether that's based on actual experience or just their perceptions. So since May of 2019, we've carried out surveys and held a number of focus groups to gather data and get a better sense of what people actually need to feel that it's worth applying. And this can vary significantly depending on their grant writing experience level, as well as the time and effort required for a particular application. So for our research, we've primarily limited ourselves to organizations rather than individual artists, although we have been sort of working to expand that a little bit more recently. Our second goal has been to identify all available funding sources within the provincial government. And when I say all, I really do mean all. It's certainly important to document all the standard arts funding, and we have, but we explicitly set the objective of trying to find every provincial program whose focus is general enough that it could conceivably be of use to organizations in the arts. The third objective has been to help English-speaking arts organizations apply for new funding and then measure the results. So this allows us to gather data to determine whether there are any systemic barriers actually causing problems for English-speaking applicants. So what does our work actually look like? As I mentioned, we've conducted surveys and focus groups, but today I'm going to focus specifically on our funding research. So in trying to document all available provincial funding, we of course started with the usual suspects in arts and culture. So in Quebec, that's the Conseil des Arts et Lettres du Québec, or CALC, which funds not-for-profits and collectives, as well as individual artists. There's also SODEC, which primarily funds for-profit companies in film and television, music and publishing industries. And then there's also the Ministry of Culture, which funds not-for-profits as well. So the research and documentation process of our research goes beyond just telling people what programs these funders offer. We also really want to be able to share all the pertinent information for each program. So we've combed through the documentation to summarize all the relevant eligibility criteria, the funding amounts and eligible expenses, and of course the deadlines to make it easier for members of the community to identify the grants that are actually relevant to their work. So the most involved part of this for us was really translating this summarized documentation into English. So the end result of this was a searchable funding platform that we launched in March of this year, which includes summaries of program documentation for over 130 different provincial programs. So currently in my slides, you can see the search field on our funding platform, which is the first thing you'll see when you load the page. So basically, once you enter your criteria there, you can look through the search results and then find the page for the program that you want to learn more about. So here you can see an example of one of the program pages. In this case, it's a program from Quebec's Provincial Arts Council. So it contains sort of a brief description of the program, as well as all the pertinent criteria you would need to apply, and of course a link to actually check out the funders page. So for the overwhelming majority of these programs on the platform, this is the only place you'll be able to find this documentation available in English. But of course, as I've alluded to, those 130 programs aren't just limited to arts and culture funding. So we went through the websites of each provincial ministry and a variety of other secretariats, agencies, and crown corporations of the province to look at the programs that they're offering, to try to collect every one that could be of use to an arts and culture organization. So when I speak of usefulness here, I really do mean in the broadest sense possible. Every program without sort of a hyper-specific sectoral focus that could potentially apply to an aspect of an arts and culture organization's work is fair game. So whether that's employment and human resources, tourism, regional development, you name it. Of course, that usefulness can vary. So a program that seems totally irrelevant to one organization could very well end up being the missing link in funding for another. So in that sense, I always stress to organizations I speak to that it's important to keep an open mind and really investigate all your options. So the end result is that out of those 130 programs on our funding platform, 18 of those are from outside the arts and culture sector. So admittedly, that's only a small subset of the total number, but we really believe these are potentially important untapped resources. And sometimes it's just a single program that can make all the difference for an organization in need. So it really is quality rather than quantity, of course. So with that in mind, I'm going to show you a few representative examples of these programs that I've found to give you an idea of what might be available where you are, to get you thinking about what you can look for to help your own work. So we'll begin by talking about Emploi Quebec, specifically their wage subsidy programs. So Emploi Quebec, as you can maybe tell from the name of the organization, deals with employment. Many of you in Canada may be familiar with federal programs of this nature, like Young Canada Works, to hire sort of temporary staff. But this example proves that it's certainly worth investigating at the provincial level as well. So if an organization is looking to fill a position on a temporary basis, this is the first program that they should be looking at. In fact, Emploi Quebec is generally I would say the most relevant funder that I recommend to people that I speak with, as it can really be helpful in addressing a common need, hiring and paying staff, of course. So it comes up time and time again in the surveys that we've conducted, the need for additional capacity and more people to help with the work that you're doing, particularly for things like communications and social media. So this program can cover a regular full-time position for up to 30 weeks, even 52 weeks under some exceptional circumstances. It doesn't cover all of a certain position's wages, but it can cover up to a majority of those wages. The exact amount depends on the type of position and some other variables. Making use of Emploi Quebec funding is not without its difficulties, or sort of making use of employment funding in general. It can be a bit of a double-edged sword in a sense, as hiring somebody does require training and supervision, which takes time and effort away from other activities, depending on the nature of the position that you're filling. So you're sort of gaining some time by having somebody to help you out, but you're giving some time back because you actually have to train them in the process. But I think that if you ask most organizations who've made use of this particular program, they would tell you that Emploi Quebec support has allowed them to bring in really talented people into their teams to do important work. And even at ELAN, we've had the opportunity to hire some really great temporary staff that have helped with things like communications and social media. And we all know those are super important and they do require special attention. But I do want to note that Emploi Quebec offers more than just wage subsidies like this. They have funding programs to stabilize precarious staffing roles. They also offer advisory services for training and human resources development. So there's really a lot here that can benefit any organization once they actually know it's available and have a look. So now I'm going to move on to a range of really interesting programs that are available through the Ministry of Tourism. The Ministry of Tourism was of particular interest to us going into this project because there's seemingly an obvious synergy between arts and culture in Quebec and our provincial tourism industry. But at the same time, the ministry's programs really do represent untapped potential, an underutilized resource that we really want to encourage organizations to investigate further where it makes sense for their own work. So I'm just going to guide you through a few of the more interesting programs that I found from the Ministry of Tourism. Beginning with the program for accessibility of tourist establishments. So this is one of the more specific and useful programs that they offer. This program supports accessibility in Quebec tourist establishments for persons with a disability. It's offered in partnership with another organization called Queroul, which supports the accessibility of tourism and cultural venues. So it can provide financial support to projects that help tourist sites obtain a Queroul accessibility rating or projects to improve existing accessible infrastructures. So it can cover up to 80% of your project to a maximum of $50,000, quite significant funding, and open to any not-for-profit, for-profit, or cooperative. So if you run a venue or another kind of cultural space that has a tourism component to the work that you do, it could be a really great way to make your own space as accessible as possible, which we all know is incredibly important, and without requiring necessarily a huge investment of your own resources. The next program is the Regional Tourism Partnership Agreement. So this is a revamped program that has been adapted in response to COVID-19. It's geared towards organizations with a tourism offer across all the regions of Quebec. While organizations in metropolitan regions can apply, I think it holds particular value for organizations in the regions, which is especially important for us at ELAN, as English-speaking communities outside of Montreal certainly face a particular set of challenges in predominantly Francophone regions, and they can really benefit from this sort of region-specific funding. So projects for this program must be structuring in nature, so basically meaning that they offer some sort of applicability and usefulness beyond just a single organization's own work, and they must enrich the tourism offer of a region and stimulate that region's economy. So based on that, eligible projects can fall under 3 sections of the program. The first supports small and medium-sized tourist organizations for opening in the 2020 season through projects that help their facilities meet the province's COVID-19 sanitation guidelines. Obviously, incredibly important right now. The second section of the program is similar to the first, but is intended for joint projects amongst multiple organizations. And then the third section is more general. It can accommodate projects such as the strengthening, installation, expansion, or modernization of tourist attractions and facilities, feasibility studies, development of the regional tourism offer, such as the implementation of sightseeing tours or the development of a themed product, accommodations serving a particular region, a festival or tourism event, as well as consulting services. So this program covers a lot of ground, supports a lot of different activities, and it's a good example of the kinds of funding that may be available to organizations outside the metropolitan regions in your own area. The next program is the Digital Development Agreement for Tourism Businesses. So this is a useful program that supports the digital development of tourism organizations in several respects. First, by encouraging and accelerating the development of digital skills, by aiding the digital transformation of these organizations, so basically getting them brought up to speed on the latest technologies. And lastly, by helping these organizations create innovative content that enhances the tourism experience. So this program is again open to small and medium-sized businesses, can cover up to 50% of the cost of a proposed digital development program for an organization. And interestingly, eligible expenses covered by this program include not just training and development costs, but also costs related to technological equipment and software, which is super useful. Oftentimes, that's a really sort of frustrating limitation with some other funding, that it can't cover those sort of technological expenses. So with these programs in mind from the Ministry of Tourism, depending on how much your organization's work has a tourism component, it can be incredibly fruitful to investigate provincial tourism funding to see what kinds of programs might be available. So next, we have the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, which has another really interesting program with a regional focus. So even more so than the Ministry of Tourism, this ministry represents an untapped and untested resource for the arts and culture community. So the program I'm going to be looking at is called the Regional and Rural Funds Program. It was launched in April of this year and replaces several of the ministry's previous regional programs. So please note, if you are looking for it on our funding platform, it's not there as of yet. I will be updating that as soon as possible. But for our purposes, it's mostly the first section of the program that is the most relevant. It supports projects that promote regional vibrancy, so sort of the appeal of a region across multiple regional county municipalities. So these have to be projects which can have an impact in more than one regional county municipality and contribute to the appeal of that region. So it's open to all regions except for Montreal and the Capitale Nationale region, so Quebec City. Funding is offered up to $1 million annually per project, to a maximum total of $3 million over 5 years. So it really does emphasize quite large projects, but for organizations who are working not just locally, but doing quite significant programs across an entire region of a province, it can be extremely useful. And lastly, I want to conclude with a useful program from the Société d'Habitation du Québec, which also helps with accessible spaces. So this is similar to the Ministry of Tourism's accessibility program that I mentioned earlier. This program helps small establishments improve their accessibility for disabled people and persons with limited mobility. It's divided into 3 sections. So the first deals with improving access to an establishment. So adding an access ramp or a parking space reserved for persons with limited mobility. The second part of the program deals with providing a barrier-free route inside the establishment for access to services and restrooms. So the standardization of floor levels, widening of doors, adding of automatic doors. And lastly, it deals with the use of restrooms reserved for customers or attendees. So the reconfiguration to allow adequate space to maneuver in a restroom, installation of grab bars and handrails, lowering of a light switch, things of that nature. And the program can cover up to 75% of eligible costs, up to $15,000, including construction costs. So another really useful, a useful resource for any space that is trying to ensure that they're accessible. So just in that quick overview, you can see there's a really wide range of programs available in Quebec, and I'm sure there's no shortage of interesting funding options available in your province as well. It's really a matter just of having a look and seeing if anything dovetails with the kind of work that you're doing. But of course, these are often untested resources, so it can be really vital to try to reach out to speak with a program officer to see if the work you're doing fits with the kind of projects that they actually want to support. It can be incredibly useful to try to just sort of develop a relationship with these different ministries or funding bodies, because potentially they have not had many dealings with people in the arts and culture sector. And I think it's really important to cultivate positive and productive relationships. Then, of course, it's a matter of actually applying. So in that respect, I just want to quickly discuss some of the additional support that we in the Quebec Relations Project are providing to the community beyond just this research. Because of course, it's important to do more than just share the information with members of the community. As we know from our focus groups, just providing somebody with 130 pages of summarized program documentation doesn't necessarily make it any easier for them to identify the programs that are actually right for them and to then actually apply. So it's really crucial for us to guide potential applicants through the process and encourage and support them. And this is all the more essential when it comes to trying something relatively new and untested, like the programs that I've discussed today. We want to make sure that people feel that it's worth the effort to actually apply. And this is important to us for several reasons. So first, obviously, it has the potential to bring in important new resources, new sources of funding into the English-speaking arts and culture community, and of course, provide a significant boost to any one organization's work. And secondly, it allows us to get a better idea of these non-traditional funders' openness to the arts and culture sector. So we can then in turn use that data to guide other applicants more effectively in the future. So with this in mind, since March of this year, we've been offering a two-part support service to the community. First with one-on-one consultations to help potential applicants identify programs that are relevant to their needs and to answer any questions about their eligibility. And this is really beneficial for both new applicants who are a bit overwhelmed by the process, as well as experienced grant writers who just don't have the time to do the research to see what else is out there. And second, and perhaps most importantly, we've begun offering subsidized grant writing and editing assistance to organizations, collectives, and more recently, individual artists in the community as well. So we work with an experienced grant writing consultant who is able to provide feedback to help applicants move from a first draft to a really strong final application. And the goal here is not just to make it easier for members of the community to submit their applications, but to do so in a way where they're learning vital grant writing skills that can benefit them for years to come, and that they can in turn share those skills within their network or community. So anecdotally, the response so far to these services and to our funding research has been overwhelmingly positive. We've been able to respond to a range of funding needs in the community, from people looking to just get started with applying to the conventional provincial arts funders, all the way to organizations who are really excited to find out what grants are available in other sectors. So Quebec Relations is slated to run until March of 2021, although we're hopeful that we'll be able to offer a second phase of the project after that so that we can build on the work we're doing and the resources that we've been able to provide to our community. So in closing, I just want to reiterate that despite sort of the specificity of this program or this project to Quebec and to the English-speaking arts community, I think a lot of what we're doing is really applicable across the country and elsewhere as well. Both in terms of finding that non-traditional funding sources that you can start looking into, as well as the kinds of support that individuals or organizations in the community can try to provide to make accessing that funding a little bit easier. So for anyone interested in discussing these ideas further, I've got my email address on the screen. I'd be happy to share whatever resources or insight I can. I've also included URLs to the Quebec Relations website and our funding platform. I really encourage you to have a look, so you can start thinking about what sort of other funding options are available for your own work that can help take that to the next level. Thank you very much.
Nick, thank you so much for that amazing presentation. It was so thorough, and I love the way that you have broken down all the information for everybody who's watching and listening out there in the various categories that they are. So for those of you who are watching and listening from outside of the province of Quebec, you can look in your parallel organization in your specific province. So for example, Nick mentioned about tourism. There would likely be a tourism board in your particular province, and you can take a look at that and see if there's a parallel program where we have funding here in Quebec. Now, for those of you who are watching us live at the moment, you're more than welcome to write in the chat or else in the question box at the bottom, and I will pass those questions on to Nick. And I do have some questions coming through, so I do want to ask those questions to you, Nick, if you're open to that.
Of course, of course.
So Nick, did we hear correctly that you are giving grant writing assistance to people?
Yes, exactly. So I will be sort of specific about what that entails. So it's not necessarily, you know, writing a grant for somebody, but it is pretty hands-on sort of editing, feedback and review to really make sure that, you know, the applicant is doing the work, but that they're learning new skills and they're really improving, you know, their approach to grant writing. Sometimes it's just a matter of kind of understanding how to be more clear with your message that you're trying to get across, getting a better sense of what kind of language, you know, funders are looking for, things like that.
All right, so in terms of the grant writing assistance that you offer, then you are specifying that somebody should have completed writing their grant application first, and then you can help them with any details they might need to with respect to the objectives or working out a little bit of the details. Is that correct?
Exactly, yeah.
All right, perfect. And if somebody wants to get a hold of you, they just email you directly. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So basically how it works is I'll do an initial consultation with somebody just to kind of get a sense of what they want to apply for. Of course, make sure that they're actually eligible or that it really does make sense for them. Often people come with, they've done the research, they know what they want, and it's a simple process of referring them to our consultant. Other times it sort of takes a bit more back and forth to kind of zero in on the more relevant options. But yeah, it's still that process of just ensuring that they're eligible and they know how we work, and then referring them to our very talented grant writing consultant.
All right, so I'm going to ask another question coming from the audience. The question is, do you have to be Canadian to apply? So if you don't mind answering this in two perspectives, because I'm not sure where this person is from, if you're outside of Canada, and you can also answer the question of whether or not you have to be a Canadian citizen in order to apply.
Well, I would say for our project, we're basically helping members of the English-speaking arts community in Quebec apply to provincial funding. So it really, you would have to be based in Quebec and part of that community. And that means, not necessarily that English is your mother tongue, but you do a significant part of your professional work in English. So provided that's the case, we're happy to be of assistance. Of course, when it comes to applying to other programs where you are, it depends where you're based. You can't necessarily apply to Quebec's Ministry of Tourism funding, but you can look at the sort of equivalent funder in your own area and go from there.
All right, but have you taken a look at the grants themselves? Do they demand that, say, for example, if you have a collective here in Quebec, just as an example, do the members of the collective have to be Canadian citizens?
Typically, that is how it works. I mean, there are always sort of different kind of specific criteria depending on the program, but usually you have to be, at the very least, a permanent resident of Quebec.
Okay, so I hope that answered the question that came through in the chat. If you have a clarification for that question, please do so. We also have a comment in the chat here from one of our Indigenous observers saying that I can see how this could apply to Indigenous communities on reserves and also in urban settings. So that's clear and concise. So Nick, I will ask you the question that in your research, have you also researched the programs that are available specifically for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people?
There are some of those that we've researched through Calc, which are available on our funding platform, yes. I'm not aware of other programs that are currently available through other funding bodies provincially, but our research is also ongoing. So if anybody does have suggestions there, I would absolutely love to hear about that, because it's certainly possible that there are other things out there.
So if somebody is from the First Nations, Métis, or Inuit community, they can contact you and get
Absolutely.
one of these sessions of consultation with you, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, and that applies for any cultural community who's watching and listening out there today, or in the replay. You're welcome to contact them regardless of the cultural community that you are from. Reach out to Nick and he'll be happy to direct you in the appropriate location. There's a question coming in saying that, do you currently offer assistance for the disability community, deaf and hard of hearing?
I mean, I would say, provided that they are, interested in applying to a provincial program and they're part of the English-speaking arts community, of course, we're happy to do that. Okay,
and there is a clarification coming through whether or not you can be a U.S. citizen to apply for these. So say, for example, if you want to promote tourism or one of these things, if you want to apply, say, for example, if you want to employ Canadians in your work coming from US because you want to employ a Canadian to be an agent, just as an example, do you think that that would be applicable for US citizen?
I think there might be an issue there in terms of eligibility, but it would depend on the particular program, so I wouldn't want to kind of foreclose that possibility, but I think I would have to, a lot of these situations when it gets into the non-traditional arts funding, it really is a matter of dealing with it on a case-by-case basis for me, I think.
Okay, and there's a question coming through, is that, are the grants you mentioned for nonprofits exclusively, or are they business nonprofit hybrid projects included?
Out of the 130 programs that we've looked at, or 130 plus, there's a range of different organization types. I would say that most of the ones that we've found are primarily for not-for-profits, though.
But as I understand, your research also included for those people who are considering themselves to be collectives.
Yes, yes, definitely.
Yes, so even if those collectives are not registered, they could also potentially look for funding possibilities in your portal?
Mm-hmm. Although I would say that funding for collectives, I think, would be more geared towards the programs offered by Calc. Although there are other programs that might be open to collectives, but it's mostly for Calc and that actual sort of standard arts funding that I think it would be most relevant to collectives.
Okay, and for those of you who are watching out of province, that is a provincial arts funding agency that's here in Quebec. I do believe also the municipal funding agency, CAM, the Conseil des Arts de Montréal, here in Montreal, also offers to collectives, primarily collectives and organizations, but that is a traditional arts funding type of body.
Yeah, and I will say, I do, suggest that people look into the programs offered by the Conseil des Arts de Montréal as well. But as they're municipal, we consider them sort of municipal rather than provincial. You would not find their programs on our funding platform.
So to be clear, you've looked specifically at the funding programs at the provincial and the federal level, correct?
Not even federal, just provincial.
Okay, so for those of you who are listening, all of this research has gone in just on the provincial level. So for you who are watching out there, we want you to open and expand your minds a little bit to think, okay, if there are all these funding possibilities that are outside the standing arts platforms, there's the potential at the federal level as well as on the municipal level. So it's a question of using your creativity, not only in your arts, culture, and heritage work, but also with the way that you look at funding. So it is something that is a little bit different for a lot of us as artists, that we don't necessarily have that business hat on, but it's something that we do need to learn better skills in order to manage. So Nick, I wanted to ask you the question with respect to what you mentioned earlier in the conversation about getting to know the program officer. Do they seem amenable and open to be conversing and talking with arts and cultural and heritage workers? Because as you mentioned, this is something brand new for them.
I would say in our research, we only have a few test cases to go on so far, so I wouldn't want to draw any kind of generalities from that. I would say there's certainly an openness so far, but I'm sort of waiting to see how some of those applications go to get a better sense. And certainly we are encouraging more people to apply because, of course, the more data that we have, it goes from just the anecdotal to really being able to draw some hard conclusions.
And are you looking for data as well, not only for those people who applied with you start to finish, but also those people who applied on their own and found out the response, whether it be positive or negative?
Yeah, sure, certainly. We're looking to collect as much data as possible. We have a survey that we've sent out to organizations that I'd be happy to share with anybody who would be interested in talking about their own provincial funding needs and experiences in Quebec, certainly.
So if anybody's interested in receiving that survey, again, the email address is on the screen for Nick Maturo, and you can write to him directly. He can pass that out because, of course, the more information we have, the better it is. Something that you and I have spoken about, Nick, in the past is about how to handle more inclusivity and more equity in the funding process. So I know that in this current phase of the project, you haven't been specifically working at the factor of looking at disability, people who are hard of hearing with the big D or the little d, deaf, and also you haven't specifically been looking at underrepresented communities at this point in time. But do you have plans to look at that for future years of this project?
Certainly. I mean, as we start sort of planning a potential second phase of the process of the project, fingers crossed, I think it would be great to be able to complexify the kind of research that we're doing and really focus not just on sort of the broader level of the English-speaking community, but get into all of the communities within that community, because the English-speaking community in Quebec is so diverse throughout the province that I think that would be a great idea, certainly.
Okay, so for those of you who are out there who are from either our First Nations brothers and sisters community or else who are Asian Canadians, because this is the topic of this conference and this symposium specifically, if you have information to offer to Nick, and the English Language Arts Network with response to how you have been received at these type of funding bodies, and if there have been specific barriers and challenges that you have faced. If you can please send a message to Nick over so that he can include it in the next funding ask, so that people understand that there's not only an anecdotal need, but there's an actual need out there in the community, and the community has supported that there are issues with respect to funding. And our research has certainly shown that there is. We are definitely, through the Symposium project, passing on that information to ELAN and the people who are working there, as well as other relevant parties. But for those of you who are out there and have not connected through us, you can connect directly through to Nick and the folks at ELAN.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, the more we have like actual sort of hard data to point at, you know, the better case that we can make in a proposal for subsequent funding to be able to, you know, address specific needs. Yeah,
so those details are really important, correct?
Definitely.
So not just anecdotal that we felt like this, but it's more that this did indeed happen to us. You want the details of the specific things. And of course, that information I know will be kept private and confidential, not only within your organization, but also to the funding body. You will just be collecting the data in specific, correct?
Of course.
All right, are there any other questions out there from the audience? We've got a couple more questions coming through. Thank you very much for that. So there's a question saying that why not organize a consultation session?
Well, we've had, I would say partly one of the issues is COVID-19 presently. It sort of makes that a bit more cumbersome. We are currently sort of in the planning phase of the last stage of research that we're trying to conduct before funding runs out in March of 2021. So there are some sort of plans underway that we haven't announced yet, but we will be pursuing sort of a number of different options for gathering data from here until the end of this phase of the project.
And Nick, as I understand, you've also done some other workshops that you have made public, and those workshops are going to be live on the ELAN website or housed on the ELAN website. Would you be able to talk about some of the titles of those projects that you've already, or those webinars that you've already offered to the community?
Of course. In fact, if you go to the Quebec Relations page, they should be up there as of now. So basically since May, you know, we had all kinds of plans for the events that we were going to be holding this year, which of course we had to change up on the fly. So as a result, I've been trying to offer 1 or 2 monthly webinars on a variety of topics that sort of generally relate to funding for arts organizations, but you know, it can branch out a little bit. So starting with just an introduction to Quebec Relations, moving on to early on, we had a very specific session on COVID-19 resources for the arts. We had a very popular session about resources for live streaming and also monetizing those live streams, which we all know with, you know, so many question marks surrounding live performances is, you know, a really burgeoning area for a lot of artists. We've talked about non-arts funding, much like today's session, and also recently had a session dealing with, you know, how to actually get started as a not-for-profit organization if you're, you know, sort of an individual or a collective, because often, you know, there can be roadblocks to accessing certain kinds of funding if you don't have that not-for-profit status. So basically that session, we walk people through the pros and cons, what are the necessary steps, and then also talking a little bit about the consulting services that we offer in parallel to our grant writing assistance, where we can help you free of charge, walk you through that registration process. And we'll be continuing to offer monthly webinars from here to the end of the year.
So again, if you have noticed, Nick stressed that it is free of charge. ELAN is a service organization, but yet at the same time, they don't charge for their services. So for people who are interested in those topics, you can go into the ELAN website. So that's, did you want to give the website address?
Yeah, it's www.quebec-elan.org.
So you can see that on the screen as part of the email address that Nick has for himself. So you can see the spelling of ELAN as well as Quebec for those of you who are interested, as well as where that dash goes exactly. And you can see also Melanie, who has been working with us, has dropped in the chat other COVID funding sources that we have also found through different organizations. These organizations are another type of service organizations, not necessarily here in Quebec, but more national, and they've got summaries of the COVID resources that are available. So Nick, I know that you have a number of those already in your platform, but perhaps you want to copy this too, because we're doing our own parallel research with this, this funding process and this symposium in itself.
The more the merrier.
So for those of you who are interested, you can go into that website that Nick mentioned, and those webinars that he gave, again, they're about an hour-long webinar where there is question and answer period included, and you can go in and check and see if some of that information is applicable for you. If you've ever had any of questions on any of those themes and topics, as you can see, Nick is quite thorough in the way that he offers his presentation, and all of the information is there, as well as all the contact information for all of the agencies that he mentions, because that information is for you, it's public, so that we can give you the best shot as possible to receive the funding. It's not just a question of offering you these possibilities, but we also want you to receive the funding that's available, so that we don't just have the same people getting the funding over and over again. We want to diversify who's receiving that.
Absolutely.
So Nick, at this time, I wanted to thank you so much for taking the time. I know that your schedule is extraordinarily busy with all of the people who are coming and soliciting you for help. Once again,
it's a good busy.
For the participants, thank you so much for being here and for your participation and engaged in all the questions that you've been asking and sending in to us. Nick, once again, thanks to the work as well as ELAN. And just to mention, just as we started, in the spirit of moving beyond acknowledgement, I hope that you will join us, yourself and also the participants who are here today, in the First Nations reflection session that we're going to be having today at 5 p.m. so we can hear their perspective as well on some of the offerings and information that we've been learning and hearing about today. So there are many more events to come. If you haven't registered for the panel events or the presentation events, please do so. You can do so up until an hour and a half before each event. And of course, the replay will be live as soon as it is buffered and ready, and you'll be receiving that in your inbox if you have registered for the events themselves. So we look forward to seeing you. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending today. Thank you once again to Nick, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Farah, and thanks, everybody.